Hello. I'm just wondering if you think there is a line that you can't cross in comedy and what that line would be. For instance, we know about SNL and Dan Crenshaw. I think we would believe that crosses a line. But then SNL came back, and I think they had a good sense of humor about it, and we laughed about it. And I think that was kind of like the best kind of humor when you can laugh with your opponents. It was really like natural. So.
Absolutely right. There are jokes that I wouldn't tell because they cross standards that I have and things that I believe that are sacred. But the measure of this is the audience. Is the audience laughing? Presumably you don't have a whole audience full of psychopaths. If you do, you have far greater problems in your society than what jokes you can tell. So the measure is the audience. Is the audience laughing? The trouble right now for the left is that they're not laughing. They're not laughing at their awful jokes. They're clapping. They're clapping as if to say, I agree with you politically, but you haven't made me laugh. So the left is making nobody laugh at all, and so they're failing at this essential issue. I think before they worry about what's crossing the line, if this is too provocative, if this is too real, they should just try to make people even chuckle briefly again. Then I think they can fine-tune their comedy.
Thank you.
Sorry. So I had a question about like religion in general, because I think a lot of younger people nowadays are maybe a little more secular or agnostic or atheist or whatever you want to call it, but a lot of us, myself included, still consider ourselves to have a more conservative worldview. So how do you kind of like rectify those two things, and how can you still have like a respect for religion and what it's done for society while still kind of maintaining a secular worldview? And do you think that as a conservative you're able to do those things, and do you think conservatives should pitch more to those type of people?
Absolutely, you can do it. It won't make a whole lot of sense ultimately, but you can certainly do it, and that's fine. I'm happy to have people who are irreligious or who don't go to church or whatever. I myself was an atheist, or agnostic at least, for a decade. I totally get it. And in this culture, it's difficult to imagine as a young person how you cannot be an atheist or an agnostic. People are raised now without any sort of religion, so they don't even have a reference point. It's not that they're rejecting Christianity. It's that they've never really explored what Christianity is. They don't really know what it is that they're rejecting. That's perfectly fine. I was about 23 by the time I reverted to the faith, which is the right amount of time, just to tell you, to have the St. Augustine view of Lord make me chaste but not yet. It's very convenient to be an atheist in your teenage and early 20s. But it certainly is right. I would just encourage you, as you explore your political views, to explore your religious views as well, because it's one thing to study a ton of economic treatises or a lot of political philosophy, but there are other questions. We know that there is a metaphysical world. The words that we're using right now are not physical, they're metaphysical. Things like beauty, things like love are not physical, they're not tangible. I can't hold on to it. So you have to ask yourself, what is the nature of that metaphysics? As always, the beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. The beginning of wisdom is humility. And I know there's a great line about how an atheist and a vegan and a CrossFitter walk into a bar. How do I know? They wouldn't shut up about it. They told me the second they walked in. But if you're the sort of agnostic who approaches these questions with some humility to say, gosh, I don't understand multivariable calculus, maybe I don't understand the divine logic of the universe, then I think you'll be open to it and you might come to those conclusions, but you won't reject a party and a conservative movement that is largely religious. Whereas the left, because they are so proud, because they have parades for pride, it's all, not just gay pride, all sorts of pride, because they are so proud, when they see a religious person, they turn away very often, and they become very narrow-minded. But you don't seem narrow-minded, so I think you'll be all right in the conservative movement.
Hi, oops, not that. I know it's kind of hard to believe going to a university, public university. I feel like a bit in an echo chamber because I live with a bunch of Catholic missionaries, and I listen to Shapiro. Sometimes I go 4 for 4 on all the Daily Wire podcasters.
Oh, great. You listened to my show 4 times? That's great. That's excellent. You must be learning so much.
Yeah. Exactly. So I'd like to get a different perspective, but I feel like the left is a little nuts. So is there anyone I can that you would recommend on the left that's smart and reasonable, left of Joe Rogan at least? Like,
No, but I will recommend shows to listen to. I listen to Pod Save America sometimes when I want to feel really good about myself. I just tune into Pod Save America, which is mostly people whining in vocal fry and then shouting profanity as though that were an argument or an observation. There was a feminist podcast, I forget the one, but they were talking about a magical witch coven in Brooklyn. That was always very enjoyable. Shows you what the other side is thinking. I can't think of much reason going on the left right now, but I can find a lot of entertainment. You've probably got a sense of humor, so you can tune into that. And don't forget, you might be in an echo chamber among your group of friends, but the advantage that conservatives have that the left doesn't is that the entire culture is left-wing. The university system is left-wing. The movies are left-wing. The music is left-wing. Everything in our culture is so dominated by the left that I think you will just by osmosis get an understanding of it. This is why John Haidt showed a few years ago that broadly speaking, conservatives understand the left. The left doesn't understand conservatives. So I encourage you, read Vox.com, have a good chuckles in the morning, read Everyday Feminism. Those are all great websites. But if you want to find reasoned argument, unfortunately, as far as the left goes, Christopher Hitchens died a number of years ago, and he's not coming back.
Can I give a comment? Also, can you tell Shapiro to stop referring to Ohio State as the Ohio State University? Just give him a big head.
Ben, I know you're watching. Did you hear that? He's not watching. He tries not to watch my speeches. No. I'll have to mention it to him, though.
All right, so first of all, thank you for coming here. I really appreciate it. It's great to have someone here. But anyways, you kind of mentioned a little bit about capitalism and like the power of capitalism. And as we found out recently, like Amazon announced the new headquarters being in New York, and people like Bill de Blasio and Andrew Cuomo made all these tax concessions to get Amazon to put their headquarters there, kind of recognizing the power that capitalism can have. And so even if these like extremely left politicians recognize the power of capitalism, is there like truly a threat to capitalism, or what is the biggest threat to capitalism?
The biggest threat to capitalism is cronyism, because all of these socialists, from the Soviet Union to Venezuela to Cuba and everything in between, they're always capitalists themselves. They're always for their own private property. They never seem to give up their own private property, do they? But they're for socialism for everybody else, especially when they're confiscating wealth. So Bill de Blasio, comrade Bolshevik Bill de Blasio, and Andy Cuomo, they know where their bread is buttered. I mean, they understand that they need a tax base. They need to have some jobs in their cities. The trouble and the worry is cronyism, though, because they're preaching the party of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez right now. Nancy Pelosi might remain the speaker, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the leader of the Democrat Party. They're pushing for more and more socialism, and you and I are going to have to deal with that socialism. You and I are going to have to deal with not being able to keep our doctor if we like our doctor, with a sixth of the American economy being upended. We are going to have to deal with lower growth, with our wealth being confiscated. They're not going to have to deal with it, so you and I need to fight back.
Absolutely. Thank you.
How are you doing?
Nice to see you. How are you?
Nice to see you again. All right. I had a question about, I was watching a David Pakman video some time ago. I don't know if you know him at all.
Vaguely. Did I do a panel with him at some point?
Maybe.
I think I might have, yeah.
Might have happened. I don't know. Anyways, he had this example of the Catalan region in the 1930s being an example of successful socialism or something like that. Do you know much about this?
I don't watch a lot of David Pakman videos,
Okay.
but I'll have to. He's the guy on Twitter. He's that left-winger who just tweets all the time. I don't know about his specific example, but I hear these examples all the time. They always talk about the mythical example on the island of Atlantis, which was only populated by unicorns, where socialism worked for 35 seconds. And they fall into two errors. Either what they're talking about is being misrepresented, it never happened at all, it's underwater now, or they're not describing socialism, or they're describing some kind of cronyism. So the typical example are the Nordic countries. They say, see, they have socialism there, isn't that great? So, well, that's very great when you don't have to pay for a military because the United States is defending you. That's really great when you convince your citizens to be taxed at 60% and give up the majority of their wealth. And that's really great when you have a culturally, utterly homogenous place where typical disputes that are commonplace in liberal democracies, thriving liberal democracies such as ours, don't occur in as great a number. That's all well and good. It's all well and good to have socialism when the United States is innovating all of our medicine. That must be really nice. Oh gosh, if only I could live in one of those places and live off the largesse of the United States. But when you cut off the leader of all of that, when you cut off Big Daddy, protector, and innovator, what is going to happen to those unicorn socialist Atlantis Islands? I think they are going to sink down to the bottom of the sea.
Hey, Michael. So my question is, so coming off the midterm elections, who do you think the Democrats are going to push forward to basically, who do they want to run for president? Who do you think they are going to push for president?
Michael Avenatti secured the nomination today. He secured it. He's secured it. I think it is now a rule if you're a Democrat that wants to be the president, you have to be under criminal investigation. You have to be absolutely awful on women's issues. You have to be a crony, corrupt, monster lawyer. And Avenatti checks all of those boxes. So he's locked it up. He's going to be the president. The question is, who's going to be the vice president? I don't know. Coming out of these midterm elections, Elizabeth Warren has made a joke of herself, I think even among the left, and she's so white, I don't see them forgiving her for that. Spartacus, I don't think Spartacus is going very far. He's so whiny. You know, the left talks a good game about wanting a sensitive man, a man who only eats vegetables and is really caring and wears pink hats or whatever. But nobody wants that in reality. It's so horrifically unattractive and creepy. So I don't think that he's going anywhere. Kamala Harris might be a threat. She's pretty smart. She checks off all the intersectional boxes. She is relatively new on the scene, and it helps to be pretty fresh. The trouble with these midterms is the people that the Democrats really wanted to run both lost. So Beto O'Rourke lost in Texas, and Robert Francis, Beto Mexican O'Rourke, lost in Texas, and Andrew Gillum lost in Florida. We're about to find out if Socialist Democrat Andrew Gillum is able to steal an election in Broward County. If there's anywhere a Democrat can steal an election, it's in Broward County. So if he wins, he has a genuine shot. But if not, then all their rising stars failed, and they're stuck with the same decrepit crones that they've got. I put my money on Hillary 4.0.
All right. Thank you. Love the book, by the way.
You're clearly a true scholar. You are clearly a well-read man.
Hi. Okay, so as someone who actually has struggled with mental illness, I appreciate the shout out. But I'm sitting in my engineering class today and I'm making depression jokes because I had a paper that was due and I'm like, and I haven't started it yet, and they're like, you're going to hate it if you don't do it. I'm like, joke's on you, I'm going to hate myself anyway.
It's a good joke. That's a good joke.
So how do we convince the left that it's okay to laugh at those jokes? Because I made that joke and I just heard crickets.
This is the thing. I mean, I appreciate it. It seems like you've got a handle, at least on the illness. It's a very difficult illness, and there are many of them, a wide variety. It sounds like you've got a handle on it, and therefore you can make a joke about it. That's a very good thing. You know, in this country, we used to make jokes about ourselves all the time. The president is able to make jokes about himself. He said he's never had a beer. Can you imagine if he had? I'd be the absolute worst. Not having a beer is the only good quality I've got, is what he said. He can make jokes about himself. Obama didn't really make jokes about himself too much. He made jokes about other people. They get very uncomfortable because they know their own tactics. If you misspeak, if somebody says something slightly wrong, you'll be called a racist, you'll be called a bigot, you'll be called a sexist. 61% of Democrats think Republicans are all of those things. So they're expecting that we're going to do the same to them, but we're not. Hopefully we're all going to be Dan Crenshaw. And when the left makes a bad, it wasn't even a good joke that Pete Davidson made on SNL, but when the left makes a bad joke, we'll say, hey buddy, it's all right. You look like a troll doll. That's okay. Don't worry about it. And they'll shake it off. It's really great. I'm really pleased to hear that you are able to at least take a little levity in this imperfect world of ours. And I hope the left is watching and they take a lesson.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for coming. So as a fellow believer, immigration is something that I'm struggling with a lot, especially with a lot of the people that are coming up that are coming from really desperate situations, right? And especially in James when he tells us to take care of the widows and the orphans. How do we grapple with national security, right? But then also taking into account the grace that we've been given and then incorporating that into a legal system, right? How do you do that?
So to begin, we already have the most generous immigration system in the world. Right now, something like 19.5% of the United States population is foreign-born. That's the highest percentage since the 1890s. We're already doing a very good job of letting people come in illegally and not tossing out everybody who hopped the border. However, one must remember that when we only emphasize one virtue to the exclusion of all of the others, it can turn itself into something of a vice. So, for instance, if we encourage illegal immigration, we know that we are endangering the women and girls who cross that border illegally. Don't just trust my numbers. Fusion and Amnesty International, as reported by the Huffington Post, says that 60 to 80% of women and girls who cross that southern border illegally are raped or sexually assaulted. The more amnesty we give, the more we encourage that. During this recent caravan, Guatemalan authorities rescued 7 kids who were being trafficked by human smugglers. This is a bad situation. So it's, of course, we look at these people in desperate situations in El Salvador or Honduras, and we say, my heart goes out to you. We'll take as many of you in as we can while maintaining the integrity of the country and while being able to assimilate you so that our country and our culture doesn't fall apart, and while maintaining the integrity of our borders so that there aren't even worse consequences created by those perverse incentives.
Thank you for coming here and taking the time to be here. My question for you is, they say that history tends to repeat itself. So do you believe that we will eventually return to a more constitutional nation, run on our founding principles?
Well, the bad news I have for you is that quote about history repeating itself, first is tragedy, second is farce, is from Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. So I'm a little skeptical sometimes, though these things do happen. It's going to repeat itself with Hillary 4.0. Yeah, that's exactly right. I am seeing an exuberance right now, and I am seeing a rebirth on the right, which gives me a great deal of hope. Are we going to return to 1776? No, ain't going to happen. Although, who would want to? Who wants to go back in time? We have our own time. We have our own circumstances, and we can apply our values and our virtues and our timeless principles to these new circumstances. Frequently on the right, people got stuck in the Reagan era because the 80s were so unbelievably successful that we just wanted to repeat and repeat and repeat. We can't. We're in a new world, and we can apply that to our new world. If you'd asked me on election eve 2016, I would have told you all hope is lost, abandon ship. I'd be playing my violin on the Titanic. But now I have a great deal of hope, and we'll see if we can keep this momentum going. It's it's a conservative virtue to have hope, and as Ronald Reagan said, America's best days are ahead. I see a glimmer of hope on the horizon.
Thank you.
Hi, Michael. So you made a comment that kind of stood out to me. You said that the right can understand the left, but the left can't understand the right. I was kind of wondering why you made this statement, and also, do you think our worldview through the Holy Spirit has anything to do with that?
Certainly. As the gentleman said earlier, not all conservatives are religious, though eventually they will be. They'll think through things. They'll eventually come back to it. Of course, the Holy Spirit reveals truth. That goes without saying. The reason that John Haidt points out in his study that the right understands the left much more than the left understands the right is because the left has a narrower field of values. So the left only has something like 3 values on which they view the world, and yet the right has something like 6 values. Values such as modesty, chastity, purity, obviously are wholly missing on the left these days. So it gives us a better view. The other reason that we can understand the left better is because we're living in occupied territory. We are living in the world of the left, and so we can understand them better than they can understand us. They try not to pay us much attention. They all talk about how awful all of us at the Daily Wire are, Fox News or Rush Limbaugh or whatever. None of them have ever listened to a single show, and yet we consume their culture all of the time. So I think I'm pleased about that. That's a comparative advantage for us. And, as you pointed out in your question, the Holy Spirit is like the greatest advantage of all. You know, it's hard to, can't beat that.
Thank you.
Hi, Michael. I just wanted to say thanks for coming. I enjoyed the show. That was a great segue into my question, which is you mentioned that you were an atheist until you were 23. So I just wanted to know if there were any kind of arguments or experiences that brought you to be more religious and converted you to Christianity, and how you would use those arguments or testimonies to share with other people who are maybe agnostic or atheists.
There were countless. I grappled with these questions for years. The first thing that started to change my mind a little bit was the modal ontological argument for the existence of God. It's a little dry, not very dramatic. It wasn't exactly Saul on the road to Damascus, but it's St. Anselm's, and now later formulated by a number of people, including Alvin Plantinga most recently. And that argument, which basically states it's not impossible that God exists, therefore God exists, that's most of the argument, is incredibly convincing. After that, I began reading a bit of apologetics. I read C.S. Lewis, Chesterton, Hilaire Belloc, Owen Barfield, guys like that. I noticed when I was at Yale, which is a thoroughly atheistic place, it's been ever since William F. Buckley Jr. wrote God and Man at Yale, I noticed that everybody was super smart. The atheists were super duper smart, but the most thoughtful people were the Christians, the handful of Christians, Catholic and Eastern Orthodox especially. And this started to convince me. I thought, well, why are all these extraordinarily smart people believing this crazy thing? Antonin Scalia gave an interview in 2011, I think it was, with New York Magazine. The reporter made fun of him for believing in the devil, for believing in hell. And he said, you know, the majority of people for history have believed in the devil. Many more intelligent people than you or me have believed in the devil. Only after all of that, much more reading the Bible, only after all of that did I have what would be called numinous experience, or a real religious sense that really does kind of knock you off the horse. It was only after all of that. So I encourage people, I know that right now the religiously unaffiliated are growing and growing among millennials. It's a huge proportion of millennials because they haven't encountered these questions. Persevere. Just because you're not being lifted up to the seventh heaven, you know, and being dazzled by lights, persevere and just read arguments, read theology, look around the world, consider why you have a rational faculty, why you're filled with a sense of awe and beauty and love and wonder, and I think you'll come to it just fine.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This is going to be the last question, by the way.
I'm Mr. Knowles. I would consider myself a pretty conservative guy. I'm a registered Republican. And I think I agree with you in that I find myself getting frustrated with PC culture at times. But I think it's harder. I find myself it's hard to make the argument that the right is completely innocent of that crime too when we do things like take away Jim Acosta's press pass, or don't deal in the realm of reality and get mad when Donald Trump says 3 million people voted illegally and then refuses to look at objective fact. I think it's harder to make the argument that we're...
I think 3 million people have already voted illegally this week in Broward County. Okay. I don't even... They're still counting those.
Then take my free speech part. Do you think Jim Acosta's press pass should have been taken away?
Of course, not because he beat a woman. He didn't beat a woman, but he behaves like a clown. He demeans his office. Donald Trump didn't remove the press pass from CNN. CNN still has White House reporters, but Jim Acosta gets up there and he doesn't ask any questions. He just pontificates. If you watch that entire exchange, all he does is challenge the president. He actually says, I want to challenge you, and he forces the president to accept premises which are not true. On the point of Jim Acosta, though, I will point out, removing the press pass is just part of the Trump-Jim Acosta show. If Donald Trump didn't want Jim Acosta to be able to ask his questions, he would have shut him up a year ago or 2 years ago. This is just television that we're watching. Jim Acosta, I actually met Jim Acosta. He came up and did a story on a campaign I was working on about 7 years ago. I knew him before he was entirely Ron Burgundy, and he's Will Ferrell on camera. And what they're playing is Jim Acosta gets up there and he says, "Hi, in case you all forgot, I'm Jim Acosta, and look at my hair. Do you think my hair's out of place, or should it be a little bit more like this?" Never asks any pertinent question, and Trump loves it because he uses him as a punching bag, and he uses him to diminish the credibility of the media. If I had to guess, I would guess Jim Acosta gets his press badge back within, I don't know, a month or something. Whenever the ratings start to dip again, they're going to bring him back. And I think that play in between them, while it's farcical and entertaining, actually is good for our republic because it means we're all tuning into the news, if not to learn the intricacies of tax policy, at least to watch some bumbling buffoon try to push a White House intern away while he pontificates to the president.
Very good. No follow-up, but anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much. It was so nice to speak to everybody.